Nikhil is an amateur college athlete. He's a footballer. He has started strength training at the college gym. He seeks your advice. As a coach, trainer, therapist, having basic idea about foundational concepts of strength training, you explained him the program. How would you periodize and design a strength training program considering he's a footballer? What all factors you would consider? If you're looking for answers to these questions, you are in the right place. Welcome to NPTEL offered course on Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation in Sports. And today's lecture is on strength training for different sports. And you are with me, Wing Commander Chandrasekhar Guru. I'm an associate professor in the field of sports medicine, the Department of Sports Medicine, Armed Forces Medical College. The learning objectives of today's lecture will be focused on sport-specific analysis to discuss the sport-specific demands and the principles of strength training, the sport-specific strength training designing. What is the rationale in planning the strength training program specific to a particular sports? What are the practical aspects? And we will discuss about various consideration that needs to be taken during planning a sport-specific strength training program. So let's dwell into the sport-specific training. Sport-specific training. Sport-specific training depends on the sports demand. So what type of demands does the sport require? What are the biomechanical demands of the sports, physiological demands of the sport, neuromuscular demands of the sport, and bioenergetic demands of the sport? Based on such demands, it is important that the training program has been planned. So the importance lies in the aspect that it improves the performance, it reduces the injury risk, and the demands, different demands would mean different training approaches. So all these considerations are required if we are looking at sport specific training. These sport specific training has to be aligned with the principles of training. The 5 general principles of training are specificity, individuality, reversibility, progressive overload, and variability. Adhering to these principles helps in planning an effective training program, avoids plateaus as well as burnout, and more often it helps in also preventing the injury. Another aspect that one needs to consider while planning a strength training program is the energy system that is involved for that particular sports. So to recapitulate, the energy system are mainly categorized into 3: the short, intermediate, and the long term. The short term are the ATP phosphagen system, the intermediate is the anaerobic glycolytic system, and the long term is the oxidative system. So as this particular graphic shows you, the phosphagen system lasts for about few seconds, followed by the combination of phosphagen and fast glycolysis. Subsequently, it's the fast glycolysis which contributes more beyond 30 seconds to say 2 minutes or so. Beyond that, it is the increased contribution of the aerobic system or the oxidative system. So accordingly, the sports also demand. Like for example, sprint, the entire event is completed, say for example an 100-meter sprint. The sprint event of 100 meters gets completed by maximum by 10 to 12 seconds. So the entire system that is activated or that needs to be trained is focused on the ATP and phosphagen system. Similarly, when you go on to an activity or a system that requires 30 seconds to 2 minutes, the more focus is on the fast glycolysis or the anaerobic glycolysis. Say for example in soccer, a striker would definitely need to sprint faster and then needs to also maneuver the directions, cutting movements, and then try to pass on the ball. So this requires a lot of anaerobic glycolysis as well. The last one is the oxidative, wherein you have endurance events. The events which are lasting more than say 4 or 5 minutes or so, they have predominantly as the aerobic system, wherein the focus of the training should be more into aerobic system training. Thus, understanding the energy demands of each and every sport is very essential to determine what type of strength quality is required for that particular individual. Secondly, it helps the coach or the trainer to design the strength training program. So we have discussed it in the previous lectures as well, the different strength qualities. Uh, Now let's focus more oriented towards the sports. Say maximal strength. Which type of sports would you think is required? Say, for example, weightlifting. Weightlifting would need, or bodybuilding would need more of maximal strength, the maximal amount of force that is required to lift the weight, called the maximal strength. Say, what kind of sport would be required? Say, strength quality of power. That is more so in case of jumping events like a long jump, or even in a volleyball game where the individual is a striker or a spiker rather. So the individual has to jump more frequently and has to generate the power as well. So there the power strength quality is required. Bodybuilding, say hypertrophy again. If the sport is focused mainly on the size and shape of the body, then it is more towards the hypertrophy aspect of it. So the sport that would come in this category of strength quality is bodybuilding. Muscular endurance. Which sport do you need muscular endurance? Say for example, combat sports like boxing. So the boxing, each kind of bout lasts for about 3 minutes or so, and you have multiple bouts. So the individual has multiple games in a day itself. So the muscle endurance is an important aspect for giving the persistent sports performance during the entire period of the bouts. So muscle endurance is what is required in, say for example, boxing. What about strength speed, where speed as a combination of strength and speed is required? So sprinting, where you need to generate the maximum amount of force within the shortest possible time with increased speed. So that is the strength speed which is required in sports like sprinting. So thus each and every strength quality becomes an important goal in terms of the sports demand. Whatever the demand of the sports is, accordingly the strength quality has to be trained. So before going in for any kind of such training, it is important to do a need analysis. Need analysis will broadly include athlete profile, physiological analysis in terms of what is the energy requirement, what is the kind of muscle type of fiber that is needs to be trained, fitness of battery test. Say that gives you an idea about what is the baseline level, and then what is the deficit which is already present, and how you can kind of address those deficits. So that is required. If you want to know that, you need to do certain kind of fitness battery test on field as well as on lab to find out what is the deficits. The important other aspect is the movement analysis, because as we've been reiterating since beginning of this particular lectures, that movement is an important aspect. The form takes precedence over the load. So the first thing is the movement analysis. When you do a movement analysis using various assessment methods that we had discussed in the previous week lectures, wherein you can use a functional movement screen, or you can use kind of various other methods by which you can analyze the movement. That kind of analysis also helps in kind of factoring in your needs in your strength and conditioning training programs. And the last but not least is the injury analysis. It is important to know what kind of injury that is prevalent in a particular sport, and what is the injury past record of that particular individual. So both of these are important in kind of framing the program. So let's go now with each and every kind of sports. Broadly, I've kind of touched upon broad different grouping of sports. So we'll see what is the focus that is there in the sports, what are the bioenergetic systems that are being trained, and what would be the key kind of strengthening exercises that would be required to kind of promote that strength goal. So for example, when we start with track and field in sprinters, so the focus would be mainly in terms of power and rate of force development. That is the strength goal would be. The bioenergetic system that you would like to train would be a shorter system like a ATP PCR system or a anaerobic glycolytic system. The exercises what as a coach or a trainer which you would incorporate in sprinters are, there may be varied multiple exercises, but then I'm just choosing few of them which could be just to give you or highlight an example of it. So key strengthening exercises where you can use in sprinters would be Olympic lifts, resisted sprints, which again helps in kind of improving it is more of a simulation of that particular sporting activity per se. The principle of specificity comes in, and then you can involve a lot of plyometrics, wherein a lot of power generation in the lower limb can be accumulated over a period of time. So that helps again in increased power generation, and that would help in better performance as well. Similarly, when you go for distance runners, so what is the contrast between the sprinters and the distance runners? And the need itself. Need, if you see here, it is more of a running economy and injury prevention from a perspective of strength training program, right? So the bioenergetic system here would be predominantly an oxidative system because you need the strength endurance here for a prolonged period of time. So oxidative system is what you will be desiring to be activated, and the strengthening exercise that you would use will predominantly be a leg lower limb mediated strengthening exercise or a core stability exercises that would help in kind of improving the running economy and help in transmission of forces from the ground to the other parts of the regions of the body. So it is important to also focus on the symmetry aspect of the individual as well. So thus a strength training program with more of a lower limb oriented with symmetry on both sides would aid in better performance in a distance runner. The next sport which I would discuss here is the football. Football, you see, the focus here is more into power, agility, endurance, and I have to highlight here that I have included all the different types of strength qualities here. So in football, you also might be aware the position also make a important analysis or the need assessment. So the strength training again depends on the position of the footballer. If the individual is a striker, or if the individual is a midfielder, or the individual is a defender, the strength quality that is required to be developed varies. So accordingly the need also changes, so the focus on the strength training also changes. The bioenergetic system that needs to be trained also changes. Say for a striker, you would prefer working more on the ATP PCR as well as the anaerobic glycolysis, whereas for a defender you would work more on the strength endurance aspect. So you would be happy to work more into the oxidative system and the anaerobic glycolytic system. So the strengthening exercise again varies depending on the strength training goal. But then here the choice of the exercises must be focused or must be closely related to the sports as well. So it's better to use more of a mobility, agility related drills, sport specific drills, which involves kind of change of directions as well as improving the eccentric activity, because sprinting again a lot of control of the hamstring. So you need to have more of eccentric kind of training of the hamstrings to avoid injury. So these are the various aspects that you would think when designing a strength training program specific to a particular sports. Like let's focus on basketball. The focus is mainly in terms of jumping, landing, contact resilience, and then overhead throws, because it involves also the shoulder for the handling of the balls. So the bioenergy system, again, it depends on the position of the player in the basketball as well as the role of the player. So that again is important. The strengthening exercises will again be focused based on the knee and hip strength, which is required predominantly in the basketball. You also need better shoulder strengthening programs so that the overhead activities are catered for and reduces the risk of injuries in basketball. Plyometrics is again an important aspect because you need jumping activities to different as well as to kind of place the ball. So these are the activities that is kind of exercise that should be chosen in case of a basketball player. What about swimming? Swimming is again a different form of sport where more of a buoyancy is involved. So here the focus is mainly in terms of the upper body as well as the lower body mobilities. Like, so you need to focus on the shoulder stability as well as the mobility aspect of it. The core strength is an important aspect which connects the both the segments, and the sport also requires explosive lower body requirement in terms of pushing the body ahead. Then it also depends on the type of event the swimming event is. So you can have a 50-meter or 100-meter sprint to an endurance event also. So based on the event, again you will have to decide what kind of strength is required. Strength quality has to be trained accordingly. The bioenergetic system involved also will be have to be focused upon, and strengthening exercises have to be incorporated in the strength training program. How about baseball or cricket, where you have again different sets of sporting activity, starting from a batsman or a batter to a bowler. Again, bowler, you have a fast bowler or a or a spinner. So the need again varies, the strength requirement also varies. Accordingly, the choice of energy system and the type of exercise also varies. Say, for example, in a bowler, you need to have a lot of rotational power which needs to be incorporated in the training aspects of a cricketer. So wherein and also in deceleration power is again required, because fielding involves a lot of running, wherein you need to suddenly have to sprint against the ball. So that is again an important aspect. So you need to work on the eccentric deceleration as well, and it involves throwing, bowling also again repetitive action. So you need to have a good shoulder strength as well. Accordingly, the strengthening exercises have to be catered for. How about combat sports like boxing? So again, boxing we discussed earlier also, it's kind of the 3 minutes bout in 3 different bouts. So you have it's going to last about 9 minutes or so, but then you have to work upon multiple motor requirement for the sports. So it needs a lot of grip, isometric strength, core rotation, as well as the strength, endurance, and explosive power. So all these aspects have to be considered while planning and strength training program, and accordingly the energy system also has to be kind of incorporated. How about a static or a more low intensity game like golf? Again, here rotational power is important, core stability is important, and that helps in kind of giving you that swing and reduction in the kind of injury risk. So all this has to be catered while framing the strength training program. How about periodizing the power and hypertrophy? And this I think we have discussed in the previous lecture as well, but then it is very important and essential part of understanding the strength training program, wherein we've been repeating endurance is a sustained activity. So you need to have more in terms of the repetitions or volume, and then load has to be low, so that with low load you can continue for a extended period of time. So their endurance would mean you have a high number of volume repetitions, and low is the load. Whereas if you are looking at hypertrophy, where you want to have an increase in the size, then you are looking at increased number of load close to 100% of 1 rm, but then the repetitions are drastically reduced. It should be anywhere between moderate to high. If you're looking at power generation, where you need to produce the maximum kind of strength in the lowest possible time, then you cannot obviously extend beyond a certain number of times. So the repetitions will have to be to the bare minimum, but the intensity has to be at the moderate level, so that you are able to sustain that speed as well. So the tempo is going to be speed, so accordingly you should have that kind of ability to perform or lift that load in that particular speed. So the focus here will be more on the speed aspect or the tempo of the resistance component, rather than the load and the repetition. So repetition has to be low. So that's how you periodize the requirement based on the power, endurance, or the hypertrophy. So each goal have a different strategy that needs to be followed with. How about periodizing this particular aspect of strength goal with the phase of training? This again we described about and discussed about this in the previous lecture as well, but then it is important to again kind of understand this, how it features in the phase of training. So with every phase of the whole training plan, the goal of the strength training phase also varies. Like if we see in this particular table, in the preparatory phase, the focus is mainly in terms of strength, endurance, and hypertrophy and basic strength. The volume is kept high. Whereas as the training program progresses and we enter into the pre-competitive phase, the focus is shifted to more towards the power generation phase, where you already have an underlying baseline strength, and then now you are going to work on the sport specific power generation phase, where the volume is kind of reduced further. It is kept it high, and then it's kept it at low level, and the intensity varies as per the sport specific requirements. So if it is a power related thing, then obviously you have the intensity kept at moderate level, but if it is a size related hypertrophy based thing, then you keep it at a higher intensity, so that you want the desired action to adaptations to happen. Coming on to the competitive phase is where you actually want the individual to perform at the peak level, where you would go in for peaking and tapering, and just maintain it for subsequent competitions which are planned during the season. So this is mainly on the sport specific drill. So a sport specific strengthening program would involve more of incorporation of sport specific drills which are more simulating the sport, rather than more of a generalic or a generalized or a generic kind of strength training program. So there you will have to have more of sport specific strength training program activities that is incorporated into the day-to-day program per se, and the volume is kept as low as possible, so that you are able to just produce that specific kind of adaptations, and then also give enough recovery time for the body to kind of have that positive functional recovery, and then later on into a super compensation phase. The transition phase is what happens after the competition, wherein the individual is rested but then not completely rested. The individual has to do some basic activities maintaining the strength training activities, so that he or she doesn't go back with the detraining effect. So it is important to also maintain the adaptation that has happened in the muscles and the nervous system because of the strength training program. How about team sports? When you come to specific sports, then it is based on the different seasons. So you have the off season, which is equivalent to the preparatory phase. Then you have the pre-season, which is equivalent to the pre-competitive phase. And then you have in season, where you have multiple competitions during the entire season, during which the team is more actively involved in the competitions rather than more of basic training. And then finally, it is the transition phase. So for by sports, if you see, based on the different type of sports, the strength hypertrophy and the basic strength thing varies over the period of different season. So to start with, initially it is the basic and the strength hypertrophy, subsequently moving on to the higher intensity power and strength activities. You maintain the same accrued adaptations during the in season, and thereafter when you go towards the transition phase, you go into more of an skill work based and active rest, so that you avoid the basic minimum detraining that can happen during this particular phase. So when we are discussing this, it is also important to highlight the importance of errors that are commonly encountered in sport specific strength training programs. The common errors which generally seen are disregarding the principle of individuality, because generally it is all in group that the trainer or the coach gives training. So the programs are generic, so obviously you need to tailor make based on the response of the individual. So it is important also to monitor the individual. Most of the time what happens is, since the programs are generic, and if it is not an elite level or a competitive level training that is being given, so generally it is more of a generic thing addressing to the basic and the general strength. So it doesn't kind of cater to the sport specific demand that is required. Progression, again an important aspect of strength training, is the principle of progressive overload. If that attention is not given to the progression of the load, it again doesn't give you the desired benefit. And if periodization, we discussed in length about it in the last lecture, the use of a appropriate periodization model is also very important if we are looking at a desired outcome which is very effective. And last but not least, which is never to be disregarded, is the recovery time, because whatever the stimulus you are giving, the body has to respond to it and then kind of adapt to that level, and then it shows that resistance and then come to the new level of settling to that homeostasis. So that is called as adaptations, and that adaptation will not happen if there is no recovery. So recovery time is again important. So it is a balanced thing, wherein you meet the recovery at that level wherein you don't go end up in a detraining effect with prolonged recovery time without stimulus, and at the same time it should not be so less that you end up in frequent stimulus and more of overtraining and overuse injuries. So it's a very important balance that needs to be maintained with respect to recovery time. So these are the common errors that one needs to take care of it. The one of the let's discuss the case scenario which we started off initially. Nikhil was an amateur college athlete, is a footballer. He started strength training at the college gym. He seeks your advice. Being a coach, trainer, or therapist who is having a basic idea about foundational concepts of strength training, you explain in the program. And we had initially started off the lecture asking how would you periodize and design a strength training program, considering he's a footballer. Now we know that he's a footballer, and now what sport specific kind of cues that you will consider in designing the strength training program. So is a young athlete, amateur college athlete. Sports demand here is football. So you need to also know what is the position in which the individual is going to play. Is because entire strength training goal is going to be based on the position in football. Say if the individual is a striker, then you will have to work more on the power strength. If it is a midfielder, then you work on the overall general strength. And if it's a defender, then you mostly work on the strength endurance, which also other strength goal as well. But then the entire periodization depends on what is the major contributing strength goal of that particular position in football. So periodize based on the competitions and annual training cycle that the data which you have. Accordingly you will have to first periodize that, and then form a strength training program, so that in a way that you also institute something to monitor it with the rating of perceived exertion and the load monitoring. So to summarize, identify the strength demand based on the sports. That's the first and foremost thing that one needs to consider, because without that you will not be able to have a direction in terms of designing a program. And the athlete profiling is very important, because that gives you so many information which is very important when you plan a training program. And all the goals that you derive based on the demand and the athlete profile has to be aligned with the phase of training and principles of training. Manipulating the variables is so essential in kind of deriving the exact or appropriate objective. And progressive overload is the key. It has to be maintained throughout the entire training cycle. And how do you monitor it and then avoid or maintain the balance? It is by monitoring. So you will need to monitor in terms of their internal load as well as the external load. So you can have something like a simple acute is to chronic ratio to identify whether the training that is being imparted is actually beneficial or is it kind of counter beneficial. So that needs to be assessed by monitoring the strength gains. And last but not least, it is important to understand the fact that every individual is different. So one size doesn't fit all. So you will have to always consider this aspect and try to look at it, whether a particular individual is responding to that generic program or not. If not, then accordingly you will have to tweak the program so that the individual responds also. So for those of you who are very much interested in further in-depth learning, I urge you to go through these references, very good references for strength training, designing and program concepts. Thank you for being with me in this lecture. Thank you. Jai Hind.